Tons of material, so much interesting insights into human nature. Uh, Neurotic human nature too, which some people call secondary human nature. Then we got the original human nature, the Garden of Eden, the dream time, the Hopi Book of what? Book of the Hopi, Book of the Eskimo, um, Coleridge's Kubla Khan, whatever, Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. We got secondary human nature, which is, of course, Homo normalis, I think it was called at one point, or Homo neurosis. Secondary human nature is neurotic. Fall of Adam and Eve, da 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 da, Zeus and Prometheus, Pandora, um, Narcissus, especially, Sisyphus, Zoroaster. Yes, let's take a look at Zoroaster. This is really, thus spake Zoroaster, but he used another name instead. You know, Dr. Nietzsche. Um, Zoroaster, who split the universe, according to Joseph Campbell and others, in half. Ahriman, um, Ahriman, actually, and Ahura Mazda. The prayer to the great goddess is very similar to the Lord's Prayer, both of which contain these kind of sovereign immunity biases, I think. But anyways, Zoroaster. So you've got the I won't call it the age of innocence, but before we split the world into polarities and dichotomies and schisms, before that happened. Now that happens every time, of course, in the individual's evolution. Technically speaking, children are born innocent of these schizo splits, these dichotomous splits, but very early on. R.D. Laing was very good at analyzing and tracing the split in children. How early did the personality become dissociated and split off from itself, so that the unity of the personality is not experienced. It's experienced as a fractured, painful state, really. That's why people love music, because it seems to reestablish harmony, although it's coming from the outside. People crave music. It seems to put us in a harmonic state, which is a clue, perhaps, why they call music the universal language. Because somewhere that harmony does exist inside all of us, which is why we all love music, pretty much. It's except the Ayatollah Khomeini, who outlawed music, I guess, just recently. People were selling, CD players in Kabul after the fall of the Taliban, who had outlawed music. And doesn't it remind us a little of Plato? There's some great, we'll get to that a little bit later, but there's some great, and this is one of my favorite writers, and I haven't read him in years, but I got this book recently. Yeah, I got this book at Upstate, Alternative Books on North Front Street. And it was a gift. Somebody gave it to me as a gift. And a great deal of what's happening right now after September 11th, I might find that passage and read it for you. Bertrand Russell was, shall we say, prescient to our current turmoil. And I believe his articles, these essays were written. Well, it's hard to say when each one was written. I'll have to go check. when it was written, but during his career, uh, perhaps after he gave up mathematics full time, when he began to write on ethics and philosophy in general, I suppose, and current affairs. But Bertrand Russell says something very interesting about the modern temperament as being split between an exaggerated self-esteem, a pseudo-pride even, including nationalism, and a tendency towards cruelty. Now, what writer did we discuss in the last 2 months that said civilization basically had only increased all the arts of civilization basically had just increased our capacity for cruelty? Aha, the great Dostoevsky. All through his writings, civilization has increased our capacity for sensations, especially cruel sensations. Bertrand Russell is saying somewhat the same thing. Now, what's interesting about Bertrand Russell's sort of take on the modern personality, starting with Plato, who he considers the ideal republic a totalitarian tract. A totalitarian tract. Plato's ideal republic. Let me see if I can find. I don't know if I left that. If I marked that off, maybe I did. If I can find the page number. I can't find it at the moment, but here's something I just, it is obvious that an autocratic system, such as that advocated by Hegel or by Marx's present-day disciples, is only theoretically justifiable on a basis of unquestioned dogma. If you know for certain what is the purpose of the universe in relation to human life, what is going to happen and what is good for people even if they do not think so, if you can say, as Hegel does, that his theory is a history, that his theory of history is a result which happens to be known to me because I have traversed the entire field, then you will feel that no degree of coercion is too great, provided it leads to the goal. He's talking about controlling people. Now he compares Hegel to John Locke, who is an empiricist. Hegel was a German idealist. Marx absorbed a great deal of Hegelian thought, he turned Hegel's dialectic into dialectical materialism, more or less. We're not going to go into all that now, tonight, of course, except Bertrand Russell. What would I compare Bertrand Russell to? Bertrand Russell is like breathing some kind of cosmic oxygen, intellectual cosmic oxygen. He's so bright, his insights over a wide field of study, including India and China, other civilizations besides the West. His insights, what he says about Lao Tzu is something I'd never read anywhere, heard any critique of Lao Tzu as kind of a backward and superstitious philosopher. I mean, I've always held Lao Tzu in high regard, as most of us have, the Way, Taoism, etc. And yet, Bertrand Russell is great in showing the weaknesses in some of the most brilliant, famous minds in human history. That's what Bertrand Russell's good at. He's got a skeptical intellect, and he's good at pricking, bubbles. Very good, which is why this is called unpopular essays. He's good at pricking sacred cows. We got to put the heat up in here. It's a little cold, isn't it? Let's get back to Bertrand Russell in a moment.
The way most of the show's been going down. Gonna do everything with our heart and do it good.
Now, Amanda and I went this evening, of course, to that slideshow at Ulster County Community College to hear John Bowermaster talk, give a slideshow and lecture, an informal talk on his kayaking trip along the coast of Vietnam from Hanoi, I guess, all the way down to Ho Chi Minh City, I believe. Let's see. Does it say that here? I took it in my notes, of course. I took notes. I always take notes. Which was an 800-mile trip, although the coast of Vietnam is, I think he said, 1,700 miles long along the South China Sea there. Many of the names of these villages and places he stopped are, as they said in the Woodstock Times, familiar to Americans who followed every episode of the war. We lost 58,000 personnel, men, Americans in that war. The Vietnamese lost 3 million. 3 million. And since 1/3 of the population of Vietnam at this particular moment is between the ages of, I think he said 17 and 24 years of age. Maybe it's lower than 17, but anyways, let's say 17 and 24. 1/3 of the population of Vietnam has no memory of the war, of the Vietnam War. It happened after they were born, and they're very hopeful, optimistic, as youth generally is, if it hasn't been traumatized too much by catastrophe. Youth, great expectations. So a lot of the people were very open and friendly. What do I want to say about this trip? That I took notes, a few notes, as I said. This Vietnamese trip. The literacy in Vietnam is 90%. One fellow that he interviewed, well, not so much interviewed as talked with, an older man who said he looked like Phil Donahue. It was kind of funny. Everyone laughed. He had white hair. He did look a little bit like Phil Donahue, a Vietnamese Phil Donahue, but he was a fisherman, an older man. He goes out in his boat into the sea and he catches these black jellyfish, for which he gets 50 cents each for these black jellyfish. But they're sold in China as a delicacy or as an aphrodisiac. They fetch in Chinese restaurants or gourmet, outlets, $300 a piece. But this fisherman who catches them only gets 50 cents. All the middlemen that it passes through, the market being what it is, he only gets 50 cents. It's crushingly unfair, don't you think? That happens all over the world, you know. I don't know what you know. You'll see arts and crafts from around the world sold in Woodstock too, of course. Jamaica, go to Jamaica, and I was amazed when I was in Jamaica at the beautiful wood carvings that could be had for 10, 20, 30, $40. You know, pieces that took weeks to carve. $40 for something that took a whole week to carve? 2 weeks, perhaps? I don't know. Longer. $10, $15? Just amazing. And then, of course, they can be sold for triple that, or in many cases, much, much more. I'm always sort of transmorgified by those facts, those economic facts. It's the same as, you know, when Roger Moore made that film after what was it? The first one was it called Roger and I forget. It was his interviews in Flint, Michigan, with the CEOs of General Motors and stuff like that. Michael Moore, Roger and I. Yeah, he interviewed a CEO from General Motors, whose name, the last name I can't remember. Anyways, he did another interview in another film, and I forget the name of the film. I think I saw it at Upstate Films. He's interviewing Stephen Knight. Stephen Knight? Phil Knight. Not Steve Knight, not our Steve Knight. Phil Knight, I guess, CEO, Grand Dragon of Nike. And, you know, the Nike shoes are sold for what? Were sold for, you know, way over $100 in this country and around the world. And the ladies making them get $1.20 a day, or 60 cents a day, or 60 cents an hour. You know, incredible. That goes on all the time. You know, it's disheartening. They don't have very many freedoms in Vietnam. Like this fellow John Bauermaster, you know, had a team with him, a National Geographic photographer who made a video of their trip. I guess a couple of women that he contracted to go with. One who was a Vietnamese lady who escaped from Vietnam when we pulled out in what was it? He said April 30th, 1975. The last American troops left. This girl left with her father, who was a helicopter pilot, actually. Was able to get out of Vietnam and grew up in New Orleans. Ho Chi Minh died in 1970. He's famous for other things for trying to unite North and South Vietnam. And there's the famous 17th parallel, which was marked by some kind of structure in 1954, over which many Vietnamese lost their lives. Anyways, this National Geographic funded trip that John made to Vietnam by ocean kayak along the shore. Well, aside from, you know, the adventure of it, and he showed slides of him in the Arctic and in Chile, in different places around the world. He's done this quite often, going on these kayaking trips, for which he's photographed and, you know, documented and etc., written articles about. I think he's the author of 8 or 9 books. Which his slides alone were worth just going to the auditorium to see, but the commentary was quite interesting. You know, in a nutshell, you got a kind of an update of Vietnam history from the Vietnam War till now, kind of, and maybe back into the 50s also. Interesting for that, and but also from something else. It connected with something. It makes me see, for instance, living in Woodstock in a different light. Just to go to that little lecture, hour and a half lecture, makes me see life in Woodstock from a different perspective, as an adventure. Torturous at times, hellish. Okay, that's the Vietnam thing. Last night on television, I'm watching Channel E. I don't know what number it is, because all the numbers have changed now. This is now Channel 23, not Channel 3. E, and it was called Wild on the Mediterranean. And I was telling Amanda today that type of, it was almost like spring break on the Mediterranean, only these aren't college kids. These are all kinds of, all ages, really, partying on the Mediterranean in different places, seaports. Some of them glamorous and beautiful, and some of them historic seaports. All along the Mediterranean, Greece and Italy, etc. Southern Spain, perhaps, I don't recall, but that whole Mediterranean coastline. I don't know about North Africa, if they visited North Africa or not, but anyways, it was done in such a way that the emphasis was on, it's almost like the hedonism of spring break and Club Med or something, hinting at kind of, wild parties, free-flying sexuality and kind of orgiastic atmosphere. But in the middle of the film, they had this a kind of an interview with this woman named Serenity, who was either a porn star or a stripper or a sex worker of some sort or whatever, who knows? And right in the middle, and it suddenly gave the whole travelogue Club Med thing another turn, downward turn to the lowest common denominator. Like World Wrestling Federation or something, how that does. And I was explaining to Amanda that at the one end, you have this kind of upper echelon, elite, glamour, stars included. They visited Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival, and you get this kind of, red carpet. But still, then it went into this sleazy, low-class, vulgar, insensitive, really kind of porno weirdness. And back and forth between those, through the upper-class hedonism, which seems sort of cultured because they take you to a couple of museums, on some islands off the coast, whatever, of Crete, and made it seem like almost a kind of a historic adventure, archaeological, historic, educational history, and then right back to the Club Med scene, and I thought, wait a minute, what are they leaving out of this picture? They never show that, the Academy Awards and the Golden Globe Awards and the Studio Actors Awards or whatever, all these things. They never show that the glamorous lifestyle is actually on a continuum, and that the other end, of course, is Sarajevo and Somalia and poverty and genocide, really. Nobody wants to admit that it's all on a continuum, because at the very top of our current glamorous, icon lifestyle that we all are bombarded with in the media all the time, it's even in the it's even the newscasters, Who is it? Katie Couric now gets $65 million a year. $65 million a year to do the Super Bowl. Stuff like that, whatever, So the glamour is now is in the news business, and it's for anyone who studies the global monopoly of the media. It's not hard to see that the continuum, at the very, very top, there's actually a lack of true spirituality. And it's easy how it can descend all the way right down into, death squads and landmines and all the things that are absolutely horrible about our present world civilization. I thought you'd be interested in hearing my take on that. Henry George? Am I thinking of it? In his book, Progress and Poverty, he makes exactly the same connection between dread, disease, horror, social horrors, the caste system, and at the top, this fetish elitism, this neurosis, this in fact, sociopathology at the top. Bertrand Russell makes the same. Quite interesting. Of course, the fellow that gave this talk, he didn't go into that very much. He did touch upon it a little bit. He did, in fact, talk about a family that was very, very poor, and they had a certain fishing technique with a net that they raised and lowered with an interesting little machine, wooden machine. And they were so poor, it was an extended family. And just across the river, or out on an island, the families were the wealthiest families that he had seen in his kayaking trip down the coast of Vietnam. And the reason for that was some of their families members had escaped to America and were sending money back, so that they had TVs and VCRs and nice houses, etc., because their relatives were in the States somewhere sending money back to them, which allowed them to buy a bigger fishing boat or something, and they could get ahead and make money. The other ones were trapped in poverty. But it's not the same connection I'm making, where this glamorous lifestyle that we see, Princess D, and who was Prince? Who married Grace Kelly? What was his name? I forget. That lifestyle, the rich and the famous, how it's connected to degradation, how it breeds human degradation. We very seldom talk about that. We don't talk about it at all, do we? Well, some people do. Some people do. Okay. We want to get out of here tonight. Let's go through some of our other points. What else? Where's our notebook here? There's different poetry venues around the area. There's the Saugerties, Dave Keim, freedom of speech poetry thing. There's the Philip Levine thing on Monday nights at the Colony Arts, and he also does special events at other times. There's the Voices of the Valley. There's probably the occasional thing in New Paltz. And then there's the Ear Inn, or the Ear Cafe on Spring Street in Lower Manhattan. And then there's stuff up in Albany. And I have to say, really, although I do go to these different venues occasionally, I know what it is that strikes me as lacking in all of them. All of them. There's a new one I heard on the radio starting up in Palinville. I believe Simon Felice is instrumental in starting that one up in Palinville at a club, the Fern Club or the Fern Cafe or something like that. I heard that on WDST over the weekend. And anyways, all these different venues, the whole let's just say the whole poetry thing altogether is there's something about it that I'm beginning to question more and more, and it is because there's no direct connection between art and nature, or civilization and nature, that I see on a grand scale that would make me feel a little more easy about the direction of our economy and culture. I mean globally. The state of not the state of the union, the state of the world. Why is that? Why is there such a disconnection? And how is it that art, as soon as it becomes designated as great, gets bought up by the institutions and becomes unreachable or untouchable in some way. How does that happen? Same thing I was just talking about a minute ago, really. But anyways, down at Wilson State Park today, after we went for a lovely walk in that area, along some trails, some ducks took off and were quacking. Amanda's a very good mimic, as you know. She's able to mimic voices and sounds. Very delightful. I always get the feeling of that we've lost our connection with nature. Even though Jackson Pollock says to Hans Hofmann, I am nature. But generally, that's how I interpret it. We've lost our art is, for some reason, disconnected. The art scene is disconnected from nature. How did that happen? Well, it's not a new thing. And of course, there's been so many different schools and philosophies and aesthetics, particularly in the West, to get back to nature. You know, the Dada poets even. What's the relation between reality and art, nature and art, life especially in art? Interesting conversation, interesting debate, an interesting dialectic. So let's go back to the psychoanalysts. Alfred Adler, an Austrian psychiatrist who died in 1937. He ended up here in this country lecturing and practicing. He broke away from Freud and called his school the School of Individual Psychology, and he had a theory of human behavior based on not the will to power, but the let's call it Bertrand Russell's urge to self-esteem in relation to the environment. Maybe I'm not making that very clear. Alfred Adler saw behavioral problems having something to do with our need to overcompensate for feelings of deficiency, what he called the inferiority complex. Anyways, it's a different way of looking at neuroses. He published in 1909 a book called The Neurotic Constitution. In 1923, The Practice and Theory of Individual Psychology. And in 1927, Understanding Human Nature. His contributions to psychoanalysis and psychology, I guess, are fairly formidable. Alfred Adler, one of the early Freudians, until he broke away from Freud's school. Freud, basically said that all neuroses has a sexual etiology. Adler broke away from that, as did Jung. Nonetheless, it seems to me to pose the problem in different terminology, similar to Bertrand Russell, by the way, similar to Dostoevsky's. Seeing why is the human personality split? Very interesting, very interesting. I have a whole list of things here. There's an old saying, you don't value what you have until you lose it. Out of sight, out of mind. You don't really value something until you're deprived of it. What is this tendency to take things for granted? Might find
find a little puzzling. On this ground, I do not claim that the essays are popular, and if not popular, then unpopular. Bertrand Russell, April 1950. Dogmatism. Dogmatism. And catmatism, too. The cat's meowmatism. Because that's what Woodstock thinks. Woodstock thinks it's the cat's meow. This is a very sort of puffed up community of people who have not real self-esteem, but pseudo-pride, we'd have to call it. Pseudo-pride. A lot of that. There's a lot of that here in Woodstock. In fact, that's the raison d'etre, isn't it? Sort of it. It's becoming more that way every minute, every day. Don't you think it is? It's becoming more and more the gourmet ghetto. We feel we're superior to the rest of the world. Woodstock is a superior place to live. Is it? Is it an oasis from dogmatism? Oh well, we won't answer that tonight. I heard at a lecture I went to, somebody spoke and said that WDST is just a crummy commercial station. I was quite interested in that the person spoke up and said that. We have a goal-oriented, ego-oriented civilization. That goes all the way back to Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare, where it goes back to placing the central importance of the human personality in the mind, in consciousness, in reason.